When I suggested she help with groceries since we lived together, my girlfriend scoffed. "Be a man. That's your job, not mine." I just nodded. A week later, she came home to a locked fridge and empty cabinets. "All right, so I gotta get this down somewhere because my buddies are sick of hearing about it, but they're also the ones telling me I need to post this story." It all blew up over a carton of eggs, or rather, the lack of them. My now ex-girlfriend Valerie and I had been living together for a little over a year in my apartment. The arrangement was, I thought, pretty straightforward. I own a small but successful construction company. I work long, hard hours, but I make good money. Valerie was a freelance graphic designer, which was a fancy way of saying she had a laptop, an overdue art school loan, and a deep-seated aversion to a 9-to-5 schedule. When she moved in, we had a talk. I told her I was happy to be the provider to cover the rent, the utilities, the car payments. It's how I'm wired. A man takes care of his home. All I asked in return was that she manage the domestic side of things, keep the place clean, make sure we had food to eat, be a partner. She agreed. She said she loved the idea of a modern traditionalist relationship. The problem is Valerie's version of modern traditionalist was a one-way street. She was all about being a modern, empowered woman who didn't need to be tied down by a man, except when it came to his wallet. Her favorite topic was the patriarchy and how it forced women into domestic servitude, usually brought up while she was sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram while I was cooking dinner after a 10-hour day. She used feminism as a shield to avoid any and all responsibility while simultaneously expecting me to fulfill the most traditional provider role imaginable. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I put up with it for longer than I should have. Why? Because when we first met, she wasn't like that. She was driven, funny, and seemed to have her own life. The entitled, lazy person she had become was a slow, creeping change, like a foundation settling in a bad way. I kept thinking the old Valerie was still in there somewhere. I was wrong. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. I got home from a job site, covered in dust and completely exhausted, looking forward to a hot meal. I opened the fridge. It was a wasteland. A half-empty bottle of ketchup, a single saddle-looking lime, and a carton of almond milk with about a teaspoon of liquid left in it. The cabinets were the same story. A bag of stale chips and a few cans of beans. Valerie was in the living room working on what she called a passion project, which looked a lot like online shopping. "Hey," I said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. "There's no food in the house." She didn't even look up from her laptop. Yeah, I was going to go shopping, but I got into a really creative flow state. "You know how it is." "No, I don't." I said the patience I had been clinging to for months finally starting to fray. "I know that I transferred the grocery money to your account on Monday like I do every week. It's Wednesday, and there's nothing to eat in this house. I've worked 60 hours this week, Val. The one thing I ask of you is that I can come home to a meal." She finally looked at me, her eyes full of a familiar, patronizing disdain. "Wow," she scoffed. "I'm not your 1950s housewife, you know. I have my own life, my own ambitions. I'm not just here to cook and clean for you." "No one is asking you to be a housewife," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I'm asking you to hold up your end of the very simple bargain we made. I pay for everything. You make sure the house runs. It's a team effort, or it's supposed to be." And then she said it, the line that brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. She stood up, her hands on her hips, and looked at me with a sneer of pure, uncut contempt. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is providing for your girlfriend too much for you? Be a man, David. That's your job, not mine." The world just went quiet. All the noise, all the excuses, all the endless circular arguments of the past year just stopped. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. She saw me not as a partner, but as a function, a walking, talking ATM whose sole purpose was to fund her lifestyle while she lectured me on my patriarchal obligations. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, at this complete stranger standing in my living room, and a profound sense of calm settled over me. I just nodded. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily quiet. "My mistake." I turned, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door, leaving her standing there smug and triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me back in my place. She had no idea I was about to teach her a very long, very detailed, and very expensive lesson on the true meaning of the word job. Update 1. The next day, I took the day off work. I told Valerie I was going to a job site on the other side of the state and wouldn't be back until late. She barely registered it, already absorbed in her online world. "Okay, have fun," she'd mumbled. My first stop was not a job site. It was a hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty keyed padlock and has for the refrigerator. I bought new teed locking door knobs for every single cabinet and pantry door in the kitchen. I spent about $200. It was the best money I've ever spent. My second stop was the grocery store. I went on the kind of shopping spree you see in the movies. I bought thick-cut Rebbe steaks, fresh salmon, organic vegetables, expensive cheeses, craft beer, a bottle of the 25-year-old single malt scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. I filled 2 carts to overflowing. I spent over $1,000 on the best food money could buy. Back at the apartment, I got to work. It took me less than an hour to install the new hardware. The fridge now had a thick steel hasp drilled into the side with a heavy padlock securing the doors. Every single cabinet, from the ones holding the plates and glasses to the pantry with the dry goods, now had a shiny new lock. The only person with the keys was me. Then I put away the groceries. I stocked the fridge and the cabinets until they were bursting. The kitchen looked like a gourmet market, a paradise of beautiful, delicious, and completely inaccessible food. When I was done, I sat down at the kitchen table and drafted a document. It was a budget, a detailed line item accounting of every single expense in our shared life. The rent, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance, the groceries, the subscriptions to her various streaming services. At the bottom, I put the grand total, the monthly cost of the lifestyle she took for granted. Next to it, I put the total of her monthly contribution, 0. I left the budget on the kitchen table, took my new set of teas, and left. I spent the rest of the day at my workshop, actually getting some work done, feeling lighter and more clear-headed than I had in years. I got home around 8 that night. The scene in the apartment was exactly what I had expected. Valerie was standing in the middle of the kitchen, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She was surrounded by her 2 best friends, a pair of equally entitled and useless women named Chloe and Jessica, who were looking at the locked cabinets with expressions of horrified disbelief. "What is this?" Valerie shrieked the moment I walked in. "What did you do to my kitchen?" "My kitchen?" I corrected her calmly, setting my work bag down. "And I just secured my assets." "You put a padlock on the refrigerator," she screamed, her voice hitting a pitch I didn't know was humanly possible. "This is insane. This is abusive." I walked over to the kitchen table and picked up the budget I had left for her. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a budget. It's a breakdown of what it costs to run this household. And this," I said, gesturing to the locked cabinets, "is what the person who pays for all of it gets to eat." I pulled my new keys out of my pocket, unlocked the pantry and took out a box of pasta and a jar of high-end marinara sauce. I unlocked the fridge and took out a package of ground sirloin. "But what am I supposed to eat?" she asked, her voice a mixture of rage and genuine, terrified confusion. I looked at her, then at her 2 friends who were staring at me like I had just grown a second head. I gave them a polite, empty smile. "Yesterday, you gave me a very clear and concise job description." I said to Valerie, "You told me it was my job to be a man and provide." "You're right. My job is to provide. So, I have provided this food for myself. Your job as a strong, independent, modern woman who is not a 1950s housewife is to provide for yourself. So, I suggest you get to work." I turned my back on them and started cooking my dinner. The sound of their sputtering, incoherent rage, the most satisfying seasoning I could have asked for. Update 2. The domestic war that followed was a sight to behold. Valerie and her friends, after about an hour of impotent screaming and a failed attempt to pick the padlock on the fridge with a bobby pin, finally retreated to the living room to plot their next move. Their brilliant strategy, it turned out, was to launch a full-scale social media smear campaign. Valerie posted a long, tear-filled Instagram story complete with a dramatic black-and-white photo of the padlocked refrigerator. She wrote about her financially abusive and controlling boyfriend who was literally trying to starve her. Chloe and Jessica immediately shared it. adding their own commentary about my toxic masculinity and my fragile male ego. They thought they could shame me into submission. They thought their army of online followers would rise up and condemn me. They had fundamentally misunderstood the man they were dealing with. I didn't have 1,000 followers. I had a few hundred, mostly other guys in the trades, clients, and family, and they were not the type to be swayed by a tearful Instagram post. While they were fighting their war in the digital world, I was fighting mine in the real one. The next morning, while Valerie was still asleep, I made my next move. I took her car keys. Her car, a trendy little SUV, was leased, and like everything else in her life, it was in my name. I was the primary lay. She was just the authorized driver. I drove her car to a secure storage facility I owned on the other side of town and parked it in an empty unit. Then I called the leasing company. I explained that I was the primary account holder and that the authorized driver, my now ex-girlfriend, was no longer authorized. I told them the vehicle was secured and asked them where they would like me to have it delivered. Back at the apartment, I continued the process of systematically dismantling the infrastructure of her comfortable life. I canceled her supplementary credit card. I changed the passwords on our shared Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon accounts. I even called the high-end gym she belonged to, the one I paid for, and canceled her membership. She woke up around noon to find her car gone and a brief, polite note on the kitchen table. As we are no longer in a relationship, I have taken the liberty of returning the vehicle that is leased in my name. As your friend, I would advise you to arrange for alternative transportation. Best, David. The meltdown that followed was of biblical proportions. The screaming, the crying, the accusations. It was a repeat of the previous night, but amplified by a factor of 10. Her friends came over again, not to help, but to act as a Greek chorus of indignation, fueling her sense of victimhood. I came home from work that evening to find the three of them sitting in the living room surrounded by takeout containers from an expensive sushi restaurant. They had apparently decided to have a solidarity dinner. They all glared at me as I walked in. I didn't say a word. I just went to my locked kitchen, pulled out a 2-in-thick ribeye steak, a few potatoes, and some asparagus. I fired up the grill on the balcony and cooked myself a meal that smelled like victory. I ate it at the dining room table in silence while the three of them watched me with a mixture of hatred and, I was pleased to see, a dawning sense of hunger. The final phase of my in-house operation was the eviction. I had my lawyer draft a formal, legally airtight notice giving her 30 days to vacate my apartment. I didn't just mail it. I hired a process server. He showed up the next day while Chloe and Jessica were there and served her the papers in front of her friends. The humiliation was a small, satisfying bonus. The 30 days that followed were a slow, painful education for Valerie in the concept of reality. She had no car, no money, and now no home. Her friends, who were so quick to offer their outrage on her behalf, were suddenly very busy when she asked if she could crash on their couches. Chloe was allergic to her cat. Jessica's apartment was just too small. Her parents, who she had a strange relationship with, were her last resort. They agreed to let her move back into her childhood bedroom, but they were not happy about it. And they made it clear that her free ride was over. She would have to get a real full-time job and start paying them rent. Final update. It's been a year. I'm sitting in the living room of my apartment, a space that is now quiet, clean, and entirely my own. The only art on the walls is the art I've chosen. The only food in the fridge is the food I've bought. It is a place of peace. The divorce from Valerie, well, the eviction, since we were never married, was anticlimactic. She moved her things out at the end of the 30 days, leaving the apartment a mess. She tried to fight me for some of the furniture, but since I had receipts for every single item, her claim went nowhere. Her life, from what I've heard through the grapevine, has been a series of harsh lessons. She is still living with her parents. She had to sell most of her designer clothes and handbags to pay for the security deposit on her own much cheaper apartment, which she is now sharing with 2 other roommates. She is working as a barista at a coffee shop, a job she despises. Her grand artistic dreams have been put on hold indefinitely by the mundane reality of having to pay her own bills. Her social media presence has withered. The glamorous, carefree influencer has been replaced by a bitter, resentful woman who posts vague, passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and toxic men. Her audience, deprived of the aspirational content they had followed her for, has moved on. I saw her once a few months ago. I was at a restaurant with some clients. She was our waitress. The moment she saw me, her face went pale. She said something to her manager and disappeared into the back, and we were assigned a new server. My clients didn't notice a thing. My revenge was not about a single explosive moment. It was a slow, methodical, and brutally practical process. I didn't scream or yell. I just took her at her word. She wanted to be a modern, independent woman. I simply removed all the obstacles, namely my entire financial and emotional support system that were preventing her from achieving that goal. She wanted me to be a man. I provided for myself. I protected my assets and I secured my home. I just stopped defining her as a part of that home. And that, it turns out, is a lesson in responsibility that no amount of feminist theory can teach.